Well, Lyle, it's so good to have you on the podcast, my friend. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Reverend Haney, for having me.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. You get my favorite question I ask every single guest. What is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
um, don't give up,
Mm,
I would say, is the best piece of advice. And it comes from several people over the course of a lifetime, starting with my mom. Um, but it was, I think, part of a work ethic coming out of, I'm going to be 78 in the year ahead of us. So, I'm a baby boomer, and she and my dad would have been, post Depression, post World War II, young adults.
greatest
And
generation.
well, they say, right? And when I reflect on our own accomplishments here in the current generation, I'm a little uncertain that we even make it to the list. But um, there was a work ethic back in the day when folks were struggling to find their place in the world and find a way to support families or even start families. And I think that those words from her and my dad, the "don't give up" part, it had to do with you got to try as hard as you can to get what you want, um, and then the
Mm,
rest would hopefully follow.
I love that.
Yeah.
You don't look the age you told me you were, but I would have thought you were in your early 50s, but that's beside the point.
I kind of look back a little nostalgically at my early 50s.
But I'm curious for someone of your age and stature, who are some people in your life who served as an inspiration for you or even a mentor along your journey?
I think, people talk about teachers who influenced them. And I didn't do very well in college, to be honest. Um, I didn't pay much attention. But there was one instructor, Dr. Maurice Mandel, who taught advertising and marketing. And of all the professors I had, and he was by far the most enthusiastic. He
Mm,
just seemed to be consumed with joy by the field that he had chosen. And he'd written a couple of textbooks. Um, and if I had any skills whatsoever, other than maybe my ability to sell things, I was a pretty good writer, but I
mm,
didn't know what to do with that particular skill. And when I thought about the possibility of advertising, which didn't require, I had no thoughts about a novel or some longer work, but I thought, geez, I could write a headline and a paragraph.
right.
There we are. So that, in a sense, he inspired the beginnings of what became my initial career path for a period of at least 15 years.
Wow.
So
That's so
there's
cool.
uh, there's one inspiration.
So we talk about your writing. I'm curious, what inspired you to write Uniting the States of America?
Well, the company that I started in 1989, and we're now in our 35th year, a company called Bang Music, from which I'm largely retired from. Um, Over the past number of years, since my younger partner has taken over management of the company and principal ownership, that's a time when I returned to writing. And this writing took the form, beginning 8, 9 years ago, of short stories and letters, a compilation of things I'd written over the years, followed by a picture book memoir of time I'd spent on a particularly beautiful island in the Caribbean. But over the past several years, as the discourse in our great nation, politically and culturally, became so, I would say, negative, in some cases violent, with, I think, far too much hatred um, between conservatives and liberals and left and right and blue and green states. It just began to alarm me, and I thought I can't just be entirely on the sidelines and give a few $100s to the candidate of my choice when the elections come up. In our family, we've had a number of grandbabies born over the past 7 to 8 years, and the most recent is this beautiful little girl, Ava Marie,
Mm.
who is the granddaughter of my wife's youngest daughter. She's the daughter of my wife's youngest daughter. And I thought to myself at that time, and this is a couple of years ago, what's our country and what is this planet that we live on going to be like when she's my age? And
Right.
at that time, I like to do that weird math. The year would the year would have been 2098. And I thought, okay, at that time, I probably won't be around for Ava's 75th birthday in 2098, but by the grace of God, I'll get a few more years. Thank you. And I felt a responsibility to think about these questions that are addressed in the book, Uniting the States of America. And for our convenience,
Beautiful cover.
can you see that? Thank you very much.
I love that cover. Yeah.
Yes, a very good friend and colleague of mine designed the cover. Um, and that was my motivation. And about a third of the way into the project, which took me over a year, I thought, I'm so unqualified for this. I've never been a political scientist. I'm not a student of sociology or civics. Uh, I'm just someone, you know, an average person who is alarmed by these circumstances. And one of the people who at times has thought, well, things are never going to change,
Right.
which I've heard from a lot of folks. And I've thought, I'm going to refrain from using my special words, but I thought, the shit can't hit the fan forever. We have to take responsibility for changing things if we want them to.
Right.
And it was my goal to write this book not as an academic, not as a political pundit, not as someone who spent a lifetime in this beltway business, but just as a person who wanted to understand what was going on and summon a simple analysis and thoughts about how we could make a difference, how we could change the tone of voice in the country.
Was there a particular moment that sparked the idea for the book, or was it just the times?
I think, if we refer to, events of literally the past several years, including the January 6th event that now seems, in a distant rearview mirror, mysteriously to me. But the period from that moment on, I think, became the stimulus. Like it seemed things had gone a bit off the rails and continued that way on the both sides of the political spectrum, particularly extremes, the extreme right, the extreme left. And although I consider myself a reasonably liberal individual, I'm probably left of center as opposed to far left.
Right.
Uh, I grew up in a kind of a middle class household. Um, my parents were Republican. My dad uh, died in his mid 60s, and at the height of the Vietnam War, my mother decided to change to Democratic. She thought the war was wrong, and she didn't like the idea of her sons going off to fight in a war like that.
Right.
Um, but back to the moment at hand, that's when I began to, over these past few years, think about writing this book and trying to write it not for my liberal friends, um, and not strictly addressing the wrongs from a political perspective of another party. I wanted this to be a book that, even though it's not what I would call beach reading, to be something that would be digestible and understandable, and that people of all stripes could could read and maybe take something from, something positive, I hope.
Good. I wrote a Bible study years ago based on the George Michael Brown situation. And I had kind of the same goal. How do I begin to talk about race in a way in America where it can actually begin to heal the nation? And so you have a term, self care plan for the nation. Can you talk about that concept of self care? Because I think we're kind of on the same line. It's not enough just to identify we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem, but we have to be able to begin to. So how do we begin to solve the problem that we're identifying as a problem?
Well, I kind of divided the book into three sections. Uh, and the self care portion, the 10 ways we can unite the states of America, that would be the culmination of the first two sections. The first being a brief history of the world, but more particularly the United States, um, followed by a section of, what I call homeland, the word land in parentheses, homeland improvements, like steps that have been taken and steps we could think about taking. And one of those chapters includes a thing called Small Steps, having to do with an initiative that the Republican governor of Utah, Governor Cox, as the then president of the American Governors Association, or whatever the acronym is for that, his initiative was disagree better. We need to, as a nation and as elected politicians, we need to stop the name calling, stop the finger pointing, sit down and do what we are hired to do, which is listen to each other and find the important ways to compromise. So there were a number of other points in that section, followed by finally 10 ways we can unite the states of America. And I chose 10 ways, not because there are just 10 ways, but I thought, well, so many books, 10 ways to save your marriage, 10 ways to get
Right.
rich, you know, 10 ways to lose 30 pounds in 10 days, blah, blah, blah. I thought, well, I guess everybody likes the 10, because now we have the 10 best songs of the year, the 10 best movies according to our critics. And I divided the 10 ways into two sections. One, the things that I think we should expect from our leadership, and maybe tweaks in our method of governance. So they get 5 ways that include the first, which I mentioned already: dial down the rhetoric and the finger pointing and work together to get the things done that you were hired to do. And there will be compromises involved. For the President of the United States, you were elected by a majority, but many tens of thousands, tens of millions of people did not vote for you, and didn't think you were right for the job at all. Nonetheless, you're the president of everybody. So
Right.
you need to visit, and it's a little ambitious, but you've got the internet on board Air Force One. Visit every state in the Union and stand in front of the people, even those, not just the ones who worship you and are going to buy your swag, but the ones who doubted that you should be the one for the job.
Right.
Stand in front of them, take your lumps, say what you're going to try to do, and explain that you're going to work with both sides of the aisle, so to speak, to get things done. I had a suggestion called Speakers of the House, and you can be involved in this, Reverend.
Okay.
Every month, my least favorite speech politically of the year is the State of the Union address, in which we watch half of the attendees standing and giving ovations and clapping and going right on to the president of their party,
Right.
and the other half sitting there quietly with their arms folded, basically not participating. It's so awkward that I'd rather read what happened later. So my speakers of the House, on a monthly basis, a bipartisan committee will name a speaker to address both houses of Congress in the Capitol for 1 hour, and that'll be a motivational speaker. It could begin with Dr. Brene Brown. It could then swing over to Coach Krasinski, Coach K. Then it could go to, what's his name, Damon? Who's the guy on Shark Tank?
Oh, I know you're talking about. I don't know his name though.
Right, I'm forgetting his name.
I know
But
I know Leary, but I don't know the other one.
yeah, so I'm going to nominate you for this. Attendance at this address will be mandatory unless a written excuse from your physician or your mother. And the idea is to point out, to remind, these are speakers, by the way, who earn a living going around the country and addressing large corporations and student bodies and so forth on what leadership is, what listening is, what accomplishment is in terms of empathy and getting things done, working with others, listening with an open mind. Those were some of the things. I'm suggesting a revision in our electoral college. For example, with the exception of 2 states in our union, Maine and I am pretty sure Nebraska, the winner of the popular vote in that state is the winner take all of the electoral votes in that state, which could make, I think, many voters in a largely red or largely blue state feel disenfranchised if they're not red or blue. Like, what is the point of my vote? Because so-and-so is going to get all of the electoral votes from California or whatever. So I say apportion the electoral college votes according to the popular vote. And then I'll skip ahead to some of the things that we have to do as citizens. We have to show up and vote. We must participate. We cannot call this a democracy if we don't take an active role and do our share.
Right.
A statistic I read that was very alarming to me was that in primary elections over the past 25 years, less than 30% of registered voters have shown up to vote. And that's just not the way things should be running. I mean, the alternative is a dictatorship of some sort. If you're going to leave it entirely in the hands of others to decide, who should be governing you and what the laws should be, then it's a terrible mistake. We need to re-emphasize civics instruction at every grade level so that we are educating and releasing into the wilderness, into our 50 states, releasing people who understand how how our government works and what their responsibilities as good citizens might be,
Right.
rather than, as if we were raised by wolves. And there's a level of what feels like anarchy when we think back on a demonstration, if you will, like January 6th. Um, we also need to disagree better, and we need to expand our news sources. When I was growing up, there were 3 television networks.
Right.
And, your evening news, which lasted for 30 minutes, I think, at the dinner hour or just before, was brought to you in black and white by a middle-aged white man in a suit. And you get to pick, Huntley
Right.
Brinkley, Walter Cronkite, blah, blah, blah. I'm showing my age now. But what's happened in this brilliant internet age in which we live and prosper, there are so many choices that we have, so many sources, that we have tended to go where our comfort level is the greatest. So in many cases, we're not listening to what other people are hearing, the opinions of others. We don't know why they feel the way they do. We just judge them because of what they're doing or what they feel, without
Right.
understanding the context in which they got those feelings. I don't know how you dictate this. I think it's just a matter of making a decision, a personal decision, and maybe it's a family decision to look to other sources to get the news. And then I'll just mention one other thing, a proposal that I'm going to say I came up with. Just, it's called the Interstate Student Exchange Program.
Oh.
We all know what a foreign exchange program looks like, but I'm very interested in the idea that a high school junior or senior spend a semester after growing up in the Bronx or Brooklyn, heading down to Tennessee to a rural town and a rural high school where the culture and the beliefs, religious or otherwise, are vastly different. And by the same token, a Southern kid or a Southwestern kid come up from that small town. And this would require, obviously, interest on the child's part, on the kid's part, and the willingness and an understanding on the parents' part that this could be a valuable experience for Mario or little Samantha. This would be awesome for you because now you're going to Brooklyn. I hope you'll be safe, honey. And everyone will be having Zoom calls with host families. But I just thought, well, what an interesting way that might be for us to get a greater grip on the idea of the United States of America. I'm pretty tired of seeing or hearing only red state, blue state. I mean, we shouldn't have a continental divide that is created entirely by, our cultural or political beliefs. Anyway,
That's radical. Asking red state kids to go to blue states and vice versa could be interesting.
worst case scenario, they get to taste some different foods, right?
That's right. I can't imagine some New York kid in Iowa, but no, I think you have something. What's interesting is you were talking about the State of the Union. I did some research on that, and apparently the State of the Union was never broadcast. It was a letter that was written by the president and just shared. It was never a big speech. So it's kind of interesting that we've made it into this media thing.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't realize that myself. Thank you for pointing it out.
Yeah, no, it was. I think Andrew Jackson just. Thomas Jefferson. I think he just wrote it. It was kind of a state of the status of the union speech. It was a letter. Just kind of here's what things are going and what you should know.
Okay.
I'm curious, what research, as you did research for this book, what was probably the most surprising thing you discovered as you were writing this book?
Well, there were so many. That I think the most alarming to me was something I brought to your attention earlier, and that is that over these past couple of decades, so few people have turned out for the primary elections. And the analysis on that, and you know, I guess I was fortunate. Anyone doing research in this era, it's very easy to cross-check because there are 10 answers and you can make sure that there's a consistency with those answers. But what startled me too was that the ones who do show up, the majority of those who show up for the primaries are the ones who are most politicized, so to speak, meaning the furthest on the left, the furthest on the right. So the candidates, knowing what's going to happen in the primaries, their rhetoric is directed towards what they know will be their constituency. So they have, knowing that there won't be, a 90% turnout, which there should be in the primaries, that knowledge frees them from addressing the other people in the room, so to speak. So we've tended to elect um, the most, in some cases, not every case, the most radical of those candidates because they won the primary.
Right.
And it's not, it's a truism that might be statistically true. It doesn't apply to every case, but it just reminds us of the importance of showing up. Another thing, and I think we know this by intuition, another thing that surprised me was the amount of time that young people spend on social media.
Yes.
And from the ages of, and I'm going to misquote myself here, but from the ages of, let's say, 14 to 18, the average kid is spending between 4 and 6 hours daily on social media. And it's an alarming statistic in the sense that those are times when you're not out in public meeting your friends, your colleagues in person.
Right.
There's been a great deal of publicity given to, the concept, the idea of bullying on social media and how hurtful that can be to, a young person in school. Um, and I'm certainly not the only one speaking about a thing like this, but it's one thing to have parental controls. It's another thing to understand the importance of, I do know parents who just say, you're not bringing your phone to your room.
Right.
Okay, you're going to go up there and study. The phone will be down here when you've done blah blah blah. It seems almost a daunting, if not impossible, task to regulate that. But part of citizenship is being part of your community. And being part of your community is like, get out of your headphones. Sometimes when I'm in New York City taking the subway, and I had spent 50 years of my career in New York City, and I love that melting pot. Obviously terrible things happen, but as we know from, headlines yesterday, even terrible things happen all around the nation.
Right.
Small towns, big towns. But if I ride the subway, as I probably will be later today, um, at least a third of the passengers are staring down at their phones um, with their earbuds on. And I think, okay, I get how that's a relief from the mayhem in this subway car where there might be 100 people. But there's also, from my perspective, um, you're missing a chance to just look at those folks and think about what their lives are. And that woman who was walked on the train with an infant and two small children, like what is that like for her?
Right.
But no, you're looking at you're texting Sharon. She's at home wondering if you're going to see Bobby tonight or something. Anyway,
No, I love that. I love the 10 things you have down there. I'm curious, what do you hope, how do you hope this book changes the political discourse in our country?
well, that's a wonderful question. And thanks to this broadcast and this podcast, every elected official in this nation will get a copy of the book.
All
So
right.
the difficulty, Reverend Haney, with a self-published work is that it's not something you'll see in the airport bookstores.
Right.
It's not something you'll see in most libraries around the country. The book is available on, the local books at the local bookstore in my town on Eastern Long Island, and it's available on Amazon. So I have the friendly folks at the publicist who brought us together made it clear to me, in spite of my suggestion to them, that I would love to be on the Today Show
Right.
and have an open conversation with Oprah. They said, "Guess you know what, Lyle? That's probably not going to happen because Penguin Books didn't publish this. You did." So, my hope, obviously, is that broadcasts such as this will bring, a somewhat wider awareness to it, that people will understand, especially now that I tell them, look, it's less than 200 pages and there are over 40 chapters, which means every chapter is pretty short.
Right.
I have a chapter called Meet My Granddaughter, which I discussed with you earlier, and that's only 2 paragraphs.
See, there you go.
So
I'm curious, as you are doing this work and you're trying your best to have the country have a different discourse, what do you want your legacy to be?
uh, I honestly don't think much of my legacy. I've tried a number of things. I had a reasonably successful career as a copywriter for large advertising agencies. And I changed that up and started a music production company because I loved being in a recording studio instead of in a client meeting discussing concepts. And I mentioned that, my little music company, which is still flourishing in New York City, Bang Music. We've just been, by the way, given a citation by the city of New York, signed by our esteemed mayor, Eric Adams,
Well, congratulations.
congratulating Bang Music on its 35 years of contributing to the artistic and cultural content of this great city of ours. So, I'm proud of that. And, of all the things, maybe I'm proudest of this book. Because it was singularly the hardest thing I've ever tried to do.
Sure.
It didn't come easily to me, and I had to talk myself back into it when it would have been easier just to close the file on my MacBook Air and go, you know what, I should really be writing something else because I'm
Right.
not sure what I'm talking about. But then I thought, and I might have been inspired by some documentary. I know that sounds silly, but someone who came back from falling down and just sort of determined their way back to completing what they had started. So, I stuck with it, and I had some brilliant readers and editors and people helping to guide me along the way, including Professor Frank Sesno, a professor at Washington University in Washington, D.C., who read the book twice, steered me, gave a great endorsement for a jacket blurb. And anyway, if there's such a thing as a legacy, you think of a legacy as something that might occur during the celebration of your life.
Right.
My hope is, unfortunately, is to live long enough that most people who would celebrate my life are too old to celebrate.
There you go.
Anyway, this
that's
is
good.
Yeah, there have been a lot of things. This is maybe the proudest. What would you like your legacy to be?
Well, I guess I'd like my legacy to be, first of all, my kids, that they learn to persevere, to never give up, and to always give it their best and show up to be their best. And I like to be remembered for someone who loved Jesus and was able to share him with the world. So
that's great.
I'm curious, where can listeners find your book, Uniting the States of America, and connect with you on social media?
As I mentioned, the book is available on Amazon. And I think typing in my name, Lyle Greenfield, or the name of the book, Uniting the States of America, will bring it up. And on social media, I'm on Instagram as Greenfield_uniting, and Facebook as well. I think just as Lyle Greenfield. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not sure why you would want to link with me, because I'm not going to hire you. I'm semi-retired, and I'm
But
on.
you might record us at your Bang studio, though.
That's correct. That is correct. So, yeah, everything but TikTok.
Oh, so you got to get on TikTok so we can see you dance.
Oh, that's great, Reverend. Maybe someone could animate my dance.
There you go. We could put your head
on. If
I'm
ever dragged against my will into TikTok, I marvel at the creativity and craziness. And then we're all mesmerized by, someone who exploded through social media. Not most recently, but the name Jake Paul comes to mind.
Oh yeah, who beat up Mike Tyson.
So stupid. There's your legacy, Jake.
We could put your head on Fred Astaire and have you dance like that. So.
I'm there for that.
Well, Lyle, thanks so much for taking the time to write this book. I think it is so needed in our culture, in our times, getting back to the heart of what unites us as people as opposed to what divides us. I think, as somebody once said, there's a lot more we have in common than that divide us. So we need to get back to looking at those things that we agree on that we can lift each other up for. And I like the idea of having inspirational speakers encourage our leaders to be leaders and not just be problems and roadblocks for the what's best for the people of America.
You got to be one of those. You're going to be one of those speakers, Reverend Haney.
I appreciate that. Well, Lyle, thanks so much. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Blessings on your work. And we're going to make sure we push out your book to people and encourage them to go on Amazon, leave a review, because that's how the book gets found.
Yeah.
Buy the book, give it to your kids, your grandkids, so they can be the generation that helps us to turn this all around.
I so appreciate you saying that. Thanks for having me, Reverend.
Thank you.
All right. Be well.
You too.
Bye-bye.
That was good. Let's see here.